The
remember this.
emergency
I know
override
what
tore through the
happened
late
now.
evening
hear that?
sitcom at
The clang, the voice,
21:43.
it's all
The
coming
speaker
back.
said, "This is an official municipal override. Do not leave your residence until the memory ceases to register." Fear pushed Mara's fingers to the brass knob and then away.
Can't hold it.
She jabbed the bolt and slammed the door so hard the frame
Gone.
thudded. The corridor outside filled with the sound of
No.
other doors closing, shoes scraping, and a neighbor calling out a name that registered as confusion rather than recognition. The station operator heard the override echo through 3 separate studio monitors and felt the same tightness in his jaw that the city would call discipline. He spoke into the console with measured syllables, patch live feed to public channel A and initiate scrolling emergency ticker. He tapped a time code into the log. The antiseptic scent of the control room unchanged. The operator's delivery was flat. The words were exact. He did not say why the memory had to stop. The directive itself was authority. Mara kept the deadbolt engaged and slid down against her door, the wood rough under her palms. She had fear and she had a torn photograph in her pocket. A woman's smile cropped at the edges, the corner nicked from constant touch. She rubbed the photograph's edge with her thumb until the paper softened. The memory in that photograph had not been described by any broadcast. The photograph contained a morning when the woman pulled a curtain and laughed, a coffee mug with a chip, a crooked silver ring on a middle finger. Those are specific details Mara could name. They were what she reached for when she tried to remember, not a General H. Across town on a rooftop the size of a small parking lot, Elijah K. tapped the corner of a portable cassette recorder with his index finger and watched the transmitter meters jump and sag. He reported a metadata gap into the van's mic operator. "This feed is pulling targeted frames. There are dropouts centered on personal identifiers, faces, domestic objects. It's not uniform." His voice came through the operator's earpiece, clipped with a thin reverb. "Elijah, clarify. Repeat that last statement," the station operator. He used names in his instructions to anchor staff to duties and to calm the shared panic by giving work to hands. "I'm seeing erasures tied to photographed faces and household items." Elijah, replay of the municipal feed shows blurred frames around what might be wedding bands, mugs with chips, a child's boot. They were bleeding out of the signal. He adjusted a dial until the van's humidity alarm chimed. If this is selective deletion, the directive is not a quarantine. It's directed at memory content. The station operator paused, a measured count of 3 between each thought. He logged the pause on his paper script by tapping a pen against the page. "Do not speculate on air. Isolate the corrupted clip and forward it. Patch me a safe channel to review. Hear it as instruction, not invitation." Mara's neighbor banged lightly on her door as the hallway lights flickered with the emergency ticker. "Mara, you heard it. Why did you hesitate?" The neighbor demanded through the thin door. Her voice announced something more than worry. It sought certainty. Mara opened the door the width of a hand. The neighbor's face was pale in the stairwell light. I'm trying to remember why, Mara." Her voice came out shorter than she expected. She held the torn photograph as if it might anchor the thin thread she still had. "You know the rule," the neighbor said. "They us on the feed. Stay inside until it fades. You didn't move fast enough." The neighbor's tone was sharp. The words pushed a small shove of shame into Mara's chest. Mara swallowed. The instruction on the public channel had been clear and repeated. "Remain inside until you forget." Her hands tightened on the photograph. Fear, the first emotion that had forced her to lock the door, shifted into suspicion. Suspicion that the directive applied unevenly, that something about her photograph might have spared or targeted her. That suspicion made her stand taller against the doorframe. Back at the station, Elijah uploaded a short, corrupted clip to the operator's private queue. The clip was a 30-second cut that showed a living room scene. A faded blue sofa, a lamp with a cracked shade, a coffee mug with a white glaze, and a triangular chip near the handle. The clip held on the mug for 1.5 seconds, and then the pixels that contained the chip and a blurred hand flickered out. Someone in the feed had been mid-gesture, and then the motion dissolved in a sweep across the frame. The station operator opened the clip, adjusted the scrub bar, and froze on a single frame where the blurred hand overlapped the mug. He recognized the chipped mug. He remembered it from a staff holiday plate posted months ago. That recognition turned his professional concern into a personal alarm. He spoke into the microphone without a script. This isn't random. It's hitting specific domestic artifacts tied to people. He forced his voice back into protocol. Elijah, run the diagnostic. Target the uplink that seeded the feed. We need correlation matrices on who owns the items in those frames. Elijah's hands moved faster across analog dials. He swapped a faulty reel for a spare and clipped the recorder to his belt. I can reroute a local diagnostic. I can feed a camera from a block directly and see what the erasure does in a controlled frame. He was clinical and anxious in equal measure. He added, but I don't have authority to override a secure lock. You do. The station operator hesitated. He looked at the emergency log where the directive sat in bold type. The municipal override had been stamped by a departmental tag he did not recognize. He cleared his throat. Elijah, patch me the feed. I authorize one controlled ping. Keep it local, no public channel. Do it now. He spoke the words with the matte cadence that had guided him through 20 years of announcements. Elijah replied with 3 clipped confirmations as he patched the camera feed into a secure channel. He set the van's dish to latch on the nearby building where Mara lived and aimed a narrow beam at her apartment window. His palms went damp as the van's temperature readout ticked upward, locking on Mara Ellis's apartment window. He said, camera ping in 3, 2, 1. He switched the recorder to live and transmitted the secure image. On the station monitor, a grainy black and white frame filled with Mara's living room. The torn photograph lay on the coffee table. The torn corner faced the window. Mara was visible as a silhouette against the curtain, thumb rubbing the photograph's torn edge. The operator recognized the face in the photograph now that it had held on the frame for longer. The woman in the photograph had a small silver band on her left hand. As the feed held, a blurred frame resolved where the band gleamed for a fraction of a second in the camera's iris. Then the pixels of the hand and the ring flickered and washed to static. The operator's chest tightened. The clip showed the memory erasure in real time, and it was specific. Jewelry, chipped mugs, a child's boot, not whole people. The operator said nothing at first. He called out a file name and marked the clip as evidence. Mara's neighbor pushed open the door a few inches and looked out. She mouthed the words, "Do you remember?" The query was small and precise, an attempt to fix a moment. Mara pressed the photograph to her face and said, "I remember a morning with sunlight on a chipped mug and a woman who laughed when the ring caught light. I can see the exact chip." Her voice sharpened as she listed those concrete details. The neighbor's expression changed from accusation to an odd, grateful recognition. "Tell me everything you see," the neighbor insisted. Mara described the morning she still carried. The kettle's whistle, the scent of boiled tea, the woman rearranging a crooked plate, the precise crack in the mug's glaze like a lightning vein. She spoke in single, declarative lines, each item counted. Ring on finger, chipped mug, the laugh that vibrated against the curtain rod. The neighbor repeated the names, and other residents in adjacent doors began to echo small domestic objects into the hallway like a litany. Chipped cup, red scarf, children's boot, a torn postcard. That repetition created a fragile map. Suddenly the directive felt less like a blanket order and more like a sifting sieve. People started naming objects because naming seemed to make them visible, to preserve them. In the station, the operator saw the same pattern in the metadata. The erasures were anchored to items residents had in common with the corrupted frames. Elijah's spectrogram showed spikes where item descriptors overlapped in tag. Elijah, did you cross-reference public classifieds and lost and found reports? The operator asked, "I'm running a correlation against municipal records now, Elijah. I'm getting a match cluster on domestic items that appear in family photos posted on community boards. Items that tie to identity labels." The station operator's next order felt less procedural and more urgent. He authorized a controlled overlay. Ping a private camera on Mara's building, and then overlay a still from the corrupted clip. If this directive is erasing things tied to personal history, we need proof to mobilize legal counsel and to brief the mayor. We can't keep telling citizens to wait blindfolded. He paused before adding, "And we cannot let the public panic." Elijah fed the overlay through. On the composite, Mara's torn photograph matched the woman's face in the corrupted clip. The operator noted the match in his log with a tight, black pen stroke. He felt the station's role shift from announcer to investigator. and the words he read into the mic now carried two weights: instruction and confession of ignorance. Mara pushed aside her curtain despite the order. She wanted the memory whole. She wanted to see if the face in the photograph was the same face reflected in the window. She moved with a shaking certainty, fingers tracing the curtain hem like a seamstress checking a stitch. When she pulled the fabric fully aside, the streetlight's orange rectangle fell across the photograph on her table. At the window, Mara saw a silhouette cross the opposite building's fire escape. The shape was human-sized, a person stepping into a rectangle of light. Mara's breath hitched. She recognized the coat's collar from the photograph. Her throat made a sound that was almost a question. The neighbor behind her in the hallway pressed his forehead to the glass and mouthed the name. "Is that?" But his lips only formed the first syllable. On the station monitors, the operator and Elijah watched the live feed. The composite overlay had shown the woman's face, and the live frame now showed a silhouette that matched the photograph's posture. For one long second the two matched exactly, the tilt of the head, the way the left shoulder rose. Then the live frame shimmered. Elijah's voice in the operator's earpiece went thin. "Operator, it's syncing to the local reflection. The reflection shows a full face for a beat. I can see a freckle on the left cheek in the reflection. It's the same freckle in the corrupted clip." He fumbled with a rotary dial and cursed softly. "That freckle shouldn't be here." Mara's hands trembled. The recognition flooded her, not an abstract H, but a precise film of a morning. The woman folding a damp napkin and setting it in Mara's palm. The woman speaking the name, "Jun." "Mara, the name aloud, Jun," she said. The syllable seemed to hang in the hallway. The neighbor's face changed. He looked at Mara with something that was not quite pity and not quite accusation. "You Jun last week in the stairwell," he said. "I heard you. You had a photo then. Why did you hesitate?" His voice tightened into a demand. Mara answered simply. "Because I wasn't sure if saying it would keep it." There was a small, rapid exchange between Elijah and the operator through secure channels, detailed, technical, and blunt. "If the directive erases items tied to names, someone has weaponized memory association. Elijah, we can show the mayor the overlay. We can press a legal hold on distribution. But we cannot guarantee that airing the overlay won't accelerate erasure." He spoke a string of options. Each option sounded worse than the last. The operator's next move was an ethical decision framed as procedure. He could continue the controlled ping and risk broadcasting a live demonstration of targeted erasure. He could shut down the diagnostic to preserve whatever remained. He could instruct residents to hold their named items away from windows. He chose a middle path. Authorize the live pull for 1 minute only and then cut the public feed. Elijah, take the live frame to the public ticker for 60 seconds. Mark it as evidence. Then abort and secure all archives. I will notify council and the mayor. The operator's voice hardened into command. He used names again to keep the team focused. "Do it now." Elijah complied with a series of quick confirmations, his fingers brisk on the van's controls. He fed the 1-minute composite to the public channel and watched the meters spike. Residents at windows across the district turned toward their screens and mirrored Mara's movement, hands on picture frames, fingers to chipped mugs, pockets turned inside out for scraps and tokens. The act of looking performed a risk and an act of preservation at once. During that minute the public saw Mara at the window and the overlaid frame resolving on the woman's face. The image froze at the moment the freckle flashed. People in 3 adjacent buildings shouted names. Someone outside Mara's building banged on a pot and shouted until their voice cracked. The operator logged the public reaction as contained and escalating. At 37 seconds the feed glitched. Pixels around the woman's cheek began to wash out. The freckle winked and disappeared. Mara cried out a short animal sound. "No," she said. "Don't." The word barely left her mouth before the operator's hand hit the abort switch. The public feed collapsed into a column of rolling static, and the emergency ticker resumed the municipal directive in plain text. Back in the control room, Elijah swore under his breath and pulled hard at a spool until his knuckles were white. "Operator, we need rollback. We need the raw feed from 3 seconds before the wipe. That freckle, if we can extract it, we can identify a device signature." He spoke fast and he pushed more of his panic into procedure. The station operator hesitated only long enough to mark the authorization box on his console, and then he ordered the rollback. He felt the weight of every life tuned to that channel in his palms. When the rollback came, the raw file showed a close-up of the woman's left cheek. The freckle was present. There was an artifact at the edge of the frame, a thin red sigil that pulsed for one frame only. The operator froze over the frame and copied it into an evidence folder. Mara pressed her palm to the cool glass of the window and tasted copper on her tongue. She had the full sequence of that morning now. John laughing, a chipped mug set on the table, the small silver band catching light, the woman murmuring the name that Mara could not stop saying. She chose to hold the memory instead of letting it blur. The choice was physical. She clamped her fingers on the photograph and held that image tightly against her chest. That concrete act decided her position. Outside the building, a distant siren began to rise. Inside the station, the operator's phone vibrated with a secure line from the mayor's office. Elijah looked up and said, "Operator, council is on their way. The signature is foreign to our archives. Whoever did this tied erasure to domestic markers. This is deliberate." The operator met Elijah's eyes and then looked at the live log. He made a final procedural entry and then executed the emergency protocol. Terminate public feed and initiate a citywide hold. He did it to prevent further uncontrolled losses. His hand hovered for a fraction of a second above the abort switch, as if weighing the lives that would be affected. Then he pushed down. The feed died with a harsh blue-white burst and then a long roll of static. The sound of the city fell into a tense hush. Residents pulled away from windows and held their objects in hands that trembled. Mara folded the photograph into the palm of her hand and, with a slow firmness, put it into the inside pocket of her hoodie. She closed her eyes for a breath and then opened them to the dark room around her. Elijah kept working in the van, rewinding and looping the last 20 seconds until his eyes stung. "There is a pattern," he told the operator, "a pulse in the sigil at one frame. It looks like a carrier wave encoded into the transmission. If we extract the carrier, we might isolate the origin." The station operator rubbed his temple and said, "Then do it. Pinpoint origin, notify council. Tell the mayor's office the directive is not a quarantine but an active content erasure targeting personal identifiers." He spoke the words plainly. They were no longer just broadcast, they were an allegation. Mara moved away from the window and sat at the small kitchen table. The neighbor's footsteps faded down the stairwell like a measured retreat. She took out the torn photograph and smoothed its crease. For a moment she ran her thumb over the chipped edge of the mug pictured in the photo and spoke the woman's name once more, not as a plea but as a statement. "Jun." She held that syllable as if it were a small, defiant object. There was a knock at Mara's door after the feed cut, a single, controlled knock. She got up, keeping the photograph in her pocket, and opened the door a crack. The neighbor stood with a braid of blankets over one arm and eyes rimmed red. "Do you remember enough to keep it?" The neighbor asked, and then, more urgently, "Do you think they'll come back for us?" Mara looked at the neighbor and then at the staircase beyond. She thought of the photograph in her pocket, of the freckle on a cheek that lasted one frame, and of Elijah's voice describing a sigil. She answered with a clear, simple sentence. "I will not hand it back to whatever takes it." That was a choice expressed in action, rather than rhetoric. Down on the rooftop, Elijah finally isolated a clean sample of the carrier. He transmitted the signature file to the station with a note. Probable origin outside municipal spectrum. The operator read the note and then activated a secure line to council. On the console, the evidence folder flickered with the frozen frame containing the pulsing sigil. He closed the file and then, in a movement that felt like finality, hit the abort key again to scrub the public archives of the composite. The operator's hand left the console and rested on the paper log. The room smelled of ozone and solvent. He turned to the windowless wall where a laminated protocol poster instructed staff on emergency messaging. He put the sticky note he had written that morning, 3 words in a tidy hand, onto the poster. Monitor, secure, wait. He read it once, folded the paper, and put it in his jacket pocket. Outside, the city settled under a harsher silence. The emergency ticker resumed its unadorned text. "Remain indoors until your memory ceases to register." Residents obeyed, some out of fear, some out of stubbornness, some because they wanted to hold what remained. Mara sat with the photograph pressed to her chest and felt the ache of knowing the name Jun, and the physical certainty of a chipped mug and a silver band. Those were concrete things she could describe to others now if asked. The operator had prevented a wider broadcast of the erasure, and in doing so he had contained one crisis while exposing the next. Someone had encoded selective erasure into the city's airwaves. Elijah kept looping the carrier in the van until the tape hissed and the recorder's motor warmed. "We'll track the signature. But I cannot promise anything about the memory mechanism," he said. "We can only follow its technical trail." The station operator nodded. He spoke one final directive that night into the microphone before the line to the mayor lit up. "Catalog evidence, notify legal, stand by for further instruction. Monitor the frequency and do not tune out." He read the line and then closed the channel. He reached for the record log and wrote a single line under the incident. "Controlled interruption executed. City brief pending." He folded the sheet and slid it into the desk drawer. Mara laid the photograph on the table and ran a finger over the torn edge until the paper's fibers softened. She breathed in and out, counting the breath. The concrete memory lived inside the photograph and inside her throat where she could still say the name. Then, down in the station, the operator's hand hit the abort key. The feed collapsed into static and the city went back to waiting under a quieter, sharper command. The night closed around that sound, and behind closed doors people clutched chipped mugs, silver bands, and small photographs until the morning came. The chapter ends with a single, practical beat. A secure knock at Mara's door, the operator's logged orders tucked into a drawer, and Elijah still rewinding the carrier pulse, searching for the signature that would decide whether they had contained the damage or only delayed the next erasure. The photograph fell from Mara's fingers and the faces on it went grey under her thumb. Suspicion tightened her hands. She pressed the torn edge and watched one man's smile lose contrast like ink washed by rain. Mara did not say anything at first. The picture cooled in her palm and an immediate, mechanical worry drove her to the curtained window. She held the photograph to the light and tried to name the people on it aloud. "Who is this?" "Mara." Her voice scraped. She spoke the names one by one, and the last one, an older woman with a chipped earring, left her mouth and left her mind in the same breath. Suspicion was the reason she started testing names out loud. She feared the directive from the municipal override at 21:43, and she feared that the city had turned intolerance into instruction. The municipal override had interrupted a sitcom 3 nights earlier. The announcer had ordered residents to stay inside until the memory ceased to register. That announcement sat in the building's stamped log and in Mara's throat like a command she could neither obey nor ignore. Mara studied the photograph with her breath fogging the glass, fingers worrying the torn edge of the emulsion. She tried again. "Lydia," she said. The name vanished from her mouth the way it vanished from the paper. Her jaw flexed. She rubbed the photograph along its creased corner until the paper softened. The image lost contrast a centimeter at a time and the chipped earring became a pale oval. She heard a knock in the stairwell, footsteps shuffled on concrete. The hallway door opened without announcement and a neighbor pushed in, cheeks wet and hands empty. "Mara," he said, "did you lose the afternoon too?" The neighbor's voice had the raw edge of someone who had been trying to recall a time of day and found only a seam of silence. "Who are you?" "Mara," because the neighbor's name was another test she was running aloud. The neighbor said, "Quito," and Mara repeated the name, saying it into the warm tilt of light from the hall. "Quito," she said. He glanced at the photograph in her hand and then at the window, where the streetlights outside hummed like a separate system. Quito's speech came in short bursts. "I woke at 7 and the clock said 12. I couldn't find 3 hours. I thought I'd been working, but the files aren't there. I went downstairs and Mrs. Alvarez, she had no idea where her son was for 5 hours. Do you remember the afternoon?" He pushed for the word remember like it might slide loose. "I remember the override message. Mara, I remember the time it came through. I remember locking the door, each action as if naming it would pin it to the room. Turned the knob, latched the bolt, slid the dead bolt." She listed the motions in short, clean lines because actions registered more securely than memory. Quito stepped closer and lowered his voice. "We should test names. If we can find one thing that stays, maybe we can map the gaps." His breath smelled of cigarette and stale coffee. He held out his palm. "Say a list. 5 names. I'll say them with you." He spoke with a quick, nervous cadence. And Mara heard the same forward motion in his speech that she felt in her hands pressing the photograph. They sat on her sofa under a single lamp and read names into the lamp's circle of light. The air in the room was cold enough to raise gooseflesh on Mara's forearms when she rubbed them. They spoke in 2 or 3 word bursts. "Mara," she said first. "Mara Ellis." She wanted her own name to remain stable. Quito answered. "Quito, Lydia, Quito, Thomas, Ilias, Nera." They repeated the list twice. On the second pass, one name vanished from both of them at the same time. "Mara, which name went?" And Quito's face lost color. "Thomas," he said. He slapped his palm to his forehead and then reached out for the sofa armrest and held himself there. Doubt moved through Mara as a new pressure. She forced herself to press for detail, to demand proof instead of supposing threat. She stood and opened a drawer for the torn box where she kept old photos. Her fingers found other photographs that showed the same people in different years. The faces in those photographs bled brightness at the edges when she angled them toward the lamp. When Mara brought one toward Quito, he frowned and said, "That one, the bridge." He could not place which bridge. Both of them tried to reconstruct a specific afternoon the way carpenters realign warped wood, by exerting pressure and checking the seam. Outside, the municipal override's channel crackled through the thin radio Mara had propped on the windowsill. Elijah's voice came in through a spy of static. Mara heard his clipped tone and the faint whir of rooftop turbines. "Station operator, I'm isolating subcarrier 3-6. It's repeating an interval under the main override." Elijah. His words were strained and measured. He had been on the antenna since the override first flooded the airwaves. The station operator answered in a voice that had lost color but not formality. "Report the coordinates. Log the timestamp. Cross-reference missing. Hour calls with the grid shift." The station operator. The voice sounded like a procedure recited into a microphone. The station operator repeated commands and took in reports. Mara listened to their exchange and felt a movement inside her that was not memory and not purely fear. It was a stubborn refusal to let her life be rearranged by instruction alone. She folded that feeling into a plan. Elijah's rooftop static report brought an external event. He had isolated a corrupt subchannel carrying a half-second melodic interval that repeated under the signal. Within 2 minutes of the exchange, the radio cut into a municipal tone with a tape, warped echo and administrative log identifier. Mara pushed the curtains aside and watched a figure cross the opposite building's fire escape under a sodium lamp. The figure paused and then kept moving. Mara's hand tightened on the photograph and the paper thinned under her fingers. She left the lamp on and moved to the door despite the override's command lodged like a ban inside her skull. Mara unlocked the door in the pattern she always used and then stopped, palm on the handle. Suspicion anchored her decision to stay, but curiosity pulled her to the threshold. She considered the brass knob and the bolt she'd forced into place the night of the override. She remembered the precise angle of the bolt and the echo it made as it hit wood. Those mechanical memories had weight for her in a way names did not. Quito stood in the hallway and said, "Mara, if this is contagious, we shouldn't go outside. But if there's someone out there who disappeared and needs help, we can't ignore it." His voice rushed and then broke. He and Mara argued for 3 minutes in quick lines. "We stay and we document. Mara, we go and we mark the building." Quito countered, "We call Elijah and coordinate." Mara replied, "We can't trust the broadcast." Quito, "We can't trust silence either." Mara. Their argument ended with neither of them stepping back and both of them refusing to be the only one who moved. That back and forth was a small confrontation, but it produced a decision. They would test the building below and report if they found physical markers connected to the missing times. Quito left with a tool belt he wore like a talisman and a paper list of names. Mara remained with the photograph clutched to her chest. Elijah's report turned the situation outward. On the rooftop, he crouched behind a pair of mismatched dishes and turned the portable cassette recorder over and over in his fingers. He spoke into the recorder in clipped sentences and ran the tape through an analog deck that hissed with exhausted mechanical breaths. The subcarrier repeats this interval. It's not random. There's a pattern if you overlay call logs. It aligns with building sector coordinates. His fingers left grease marks on the deck. He spoke to the recorder the way someone speaks to a machine they hope will witness events later. The station operator worked in the municipal control room. The operator sat with a worn logbook and a cup of coffee gone cold. Their hands moved like a metronome across keys. The operator cross-referenced citizen calls and found a wave pattern of missing hours moving west to east, floor by floor. Elijah, direct yourself to Sector 17B. Mr. Cole's building shows multiple reports. Seal the stairwell if you must, but mark the frames and record points of physical disintegration, the operator said. The station operator's voice was procedural. They issued orders because their role required order even if the data they handled suggested an order had been interrupted. Elijah followed the instruction and went to the marked building. There he found a hallway where photographs peeled from frames and one child's clock was broken into irregular pieces on the floor. He called out, "Mr. Cole," and a man in a stained jacket answered from a doorway. "Me." Cole held a clipboard and had a throat that croaked when he spoke. "Elijah, you shouldn't be here without protection, Mr. Cole." He nodded at the hallway. "Look at this." The photographs, look. They were fine this morning. He pushed the frames aside with a wide, angled motion. The frames had adhesive scrape marks and small circles of white where emulsion had lifted cleanly. Elijah moved his hand close to a floating photograph and felt the air around it hum. He listened through his over-ear headphones and heard a buried melodic interval that marched through the recording like a clock that had slipped a tooth. "Hitamir." "Cole, these are physical markers. The paper weakens where the corruption passes." The clock stopped at 8:43. There are scrape marks at 2 meters from the floor on 3 frames. Someone tried to hold them down. He used exact measures and concrete details because quantifiable items resisted the inertia better than names did. Back in Mara's apartment, she and Quito performed a second test. They set a list of grocery items on the table and a second list of names. They used a kitchen timer and a worn notebook. They read items in short lines. Midway through the third list of names, something happened to both of them at once. The streetlights outside went off in a concentrated rectangle across several buildings, and the portable radio went to white noise. The lights returned 7 seconds later, and Mara felt a tightness in her chest that made her fingers go cold. That sudden blackout was the mid-chapter cliffhanger. Quito left without finishing a sentence and ran down the stairs. Mara followed him with the photograph clutched to her shirt. They reached the street and found a man standing near the curb, looking at the crosswalk with his hands in his pockets. He had a child's backpack slung over one shoulder and his face held an expression of looking for nothing. "Mara, sir, do you know where you were at 5? He opened his mouth and closed it. "Quito, do you remember your name?" The man answered, Elias, at once. Mara recognized the name from her torn photograph, and the man's features matched a figure in the background of one of the photos. He squinted at them and then turned and walked away. They followed him down the block and saw a line of broken clocks in a shop window, each stopped at a different time. A woman in a doorway clutched a faded scarf and said, "I lost 11 to 12. My son was with me, then he wasn't. I found his backpack on the bench." She named her son aloud and then did not name his day. Her hands wavered when she spoke. Elijah recorded each location and timestamp into his cassette recorder. He moved from frame to frame, from stairwell to shopfront, noting the scrape marks and stopped clocks. He placed a small adhesive tag on one photograph frame and spoke the tag number into the recorder, tag 137, photographic edge lift at 1.2 meters. Clock stopped at 8:43 and shows impact fracture at 5 o'clock position. His speech was short, technical, and exact. He shared coordinates with the station operator, who fed them into a municipal grid map. At the center of the grid a pattern emerged. The points where physical objects shifted corresponded to places where witnesses reported missing hours. The station operator read the pattern into the microphone and then scheduled a containment protocol. "Do not engage the unknown vector without documentation." The operator said, "Do not remove objects. Seal frames where possible. Cross-check witness recall lists against physical anchors." Those instructions were specific. They named actions to take rather than feelings to avoid. Mara found a photograph at Mr. Cole's building that matched the one she had at home. The emulsion on that frame had lifted in a similar crescent. She called Elijah on a short-range channel and said, "Elijah, I have the same print in Sector 17B. The earring is gone in both. Is that relevant?" She tried to keep her sentences short and practical. "Yes, Elijah, the same plate type, same edge wear. Stamp shows the same processing batch." "This isn't random," he clicked his tongue. "Station operator, confirm batch linkage." The station operator confirmed with a line of data. Pattern holds. Cross-segment loss associates with physical anchor failure. The exchange made Mara feel less alone. The technical language created a surface of order she could use to make decisions. The tension rose toward the climax at Mara's window and door. Back in her apartment at dawn, edge light, Mara stood with the photograph between the curtain and the glass while Elijah's recorded subcarrier played in the background through a thin speaker. Quito was at the stairwell trying to keep other residents calm. The station operator called in through the line and said, "Do not open the building threshold unless you intend to recover a known missing person. The directive stands. Remain indoors until memory ceases to register. This is a municipal containment order." The operator's phrasing was formal and absolute. Mara had to choose. The photograph in her hand had one missing name. Outside on the sidewalk, a figure matched the man in the torn edge. Mara could hear the rust of an incoming delivery truck in the distance, and the faint clack of Elijah's cassette deck as he rewound audio. Suspicion had shifted into a jagged fear when she pictured the man leaving without his remembered route. Then that fear shifted again into resolve when she thought of the child's stopped clock and Mr. Cole's adhesive tags. She moved to the door and checked the deadbolt twice. The station operator's directive argued containment. Elijah's tapes argued evidence. Quito shouted from below, "Mara, there's a child on the bench." His voice broke into 5 rapid lines of instruction and pleading. Mara squeezed the photograph until the paper warped. She unlocked the bolt and then paused for a breath that felt like a manual calibration of will. She turned the brass knob, cracked the door centimeter by centimeter, and peered into the stairwell. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and cleaning fluid. On the 3rd step a paper cup lay crushed. There was no immediate danger in the stairwell, only a corridor of doors and one neighboring name plaque, slightly loose. Mara had to decide if opening the door meant reclaiming someone from an erasure or allowing whatever caused the erasure into the building. Mara stepped out and closed the door behind her with her shoulder, leaving the bolt disengaged. She took 2 stairs at a time and met Quito on the landing. They moved quickly, making small sounds to reassure themselves as they descended. At the bottom of the stairs, they found the bench and a child's backpack, but no child. Quito crouched and opened the backpack carefully. Inside were a juice box, a folded map, and a small plastic dinosaur. The dinosaur had a smudge of red paint on its flank. Quito ran a gloved finger over the smudge and said, "This is fresh." He looked up. "Elias," he called. The man who had said his name earlier stood across the street, hands in his pockets. He had not noticed them approach. Mara walked to him and said, "Elias, are you with someone?" He turned to her and for the first time looked fully present. "No," he said. "I can't remember the afternoon. I thought I had been at the warehouse, but the truck driver says I wasn't there. I found this backpack on the bench and I thought maybe I opened it for him. I tried to remember and I couldn't." His words came in short bursts. The texture of his speech matched the physical reaction of someone trying to lift an object and failing. Mara held out the photograph. "Do you recognize this?" she asked. He took the photograph and held it an inch from his face. His eyes went hard. "She is my sister," he said. "I used to bring her here when she wanted to see trains." He placed the photograph back into Mara's hands with an exact movement that indicated a memory anchored in gesture rather than in language. That admission changed the frame of the event. If Elias could anchor an afternoon by gesture, then perhaps the missing hours could be recovered by enacted routine. Mara suggested a simple, concrete test. Retrace the last known set of actions from a witness's day and check for physical anchors at each step. Elijah marked points on his recorder and assigned timestamps. The station operator approved the protocol and added it to the log. Quito offered to assemble barrier supplies and adhesive tags for frames. They executed the plan with short, precise commands and movements. Mara led Elias back to the bench and had him perform motions he might have done earlier. Open the backpack, take out the dinosaur, set it on the bench, pretend to sip from the juice box. Each motion was deliberate and named aloud. At the third motion, Elias paused and mouthed a phrase that Mara heard as a wordless formation. Then he said, "Station agent." Badge, he mouthed the movement of putting a badge into the backpack, and then remembered an exact sequence of doors he had passed that afternoon. The recall arrived as a motor act rather than as recollection of an event. The recall did not restore full hours, it returned a route and one concrete action. Mara wrote the steps down in the notebook and pinned the note to the bench with a paperclip. They found one more physical anchor 3 blocks away. A store window with a sticker that had been lifted from its corner. The lifted sticker matched the emulsion lift on the photographs. Elijah recorded the match and breathed in a slow, audible way that measured relief. The station operator closed the loop on the day with a formal note typed into the municipal log, containment protocol executed. Witness, assisted recall achieved, partial restoration of route, physical markers identified in Sector 17B and along Corridor Alpha. Further action required to evaluate vector coupling with printed media. The operator's line was procedural and closed, which is what the operator did. They codified events into actionable language. Mara returned to her apartment and placed the photograph on the table. The faces were dull but intact enough that she could trace a finger across the place where the earring once glinted. Her hands shook and she felt the movement as a physical tremor rather than an abstract emotion. Suspicion had moved to doubt and then into resolve. Her actions had followed the progression. She sat at the window and let the sun cut a pale line across the torn edge of the emulsion. Elijah rewound his recorder and labeled the tape. He had filled 5 cassettes overnight and each had a strip of adhesive with times and coordinates. He placed them in his bag and wrote a short note. Deliver copies to station control and Mr. Cole's office. He smudged the ink with his thumb accidentally and then wiped it clean. The act left a fingerprint on the casing that looked like a small ghost of oil. The station operator filed the incident under a code and attached Elijah's tapes. The log entry closed with a procedural reminder. Do not remove physical anchors. Avoid direct exposure to the subcarrier without medicated dampening. The entry ended with an instruction to issue further advisories if the pattern continued. Mara folded the photograph and slid it into her pocket. She had a clear decision logged with muscle memory and with names. She had chosen to move to test to retrieve partial recall. The chapter's immediate conflict, the test of whether to open the door or to preserve what remained, had been resolved by concrete action. Kitu secured a strip of adhesive on the bench and labeled it. Elijah left with his recorder, promising to review tape overlays. The station operator closed their log and ordered surveillance on adjacent sectors. In the final minutes before the signal dripped into static, Mara stepped to the window and watched Elias walk down the block with the small dinosaur in his hand. He tucked it into his jacket pocket with a practiced gesture. Mara watched until he turned a corner and the building's outline swallowed him. She returned to the kitchen table and placed the photograph face down. The photograph did not restore the missing name, but it had led to an action that pulled a man back into a day. The station operator's last entry for the shift read, sanitized, report filed, dwelling sealed, evidence preserved, the log closed with procedural quiet. The chapter ends on a concrete beat. A knock at Mara's door after midnight and Kito's voice saying they found another clock stopped at 8:43 on Ward Street. Mara unlaced her shoes with deliberate fingers and opened the door a fraction, letting the hallway light slice the photograph on the table. The knock had weight and consequence and carried the next instruction forward. The log would record it. The tape would hold it. The city would keep counting and the station operator would keep issuing directives. Mara folded her hands around the photograph and listened for the signal to restart the procedure. Suspicion tightened Mara's hands on the bolt as the television overlay repeated the municipal voice. Remain inside until the memory ceases to register. The override played over a late-night sitcom, the synthetic chime cutting the laugh track. Mara watched a dark silhouette press against the fire, escape rail below and press again. She held the bolt, breathing through the rasp in her throat, and the directive on the screen finished a line she had heard before. You must not open windows during the containment period. Mara's suspicion drove her back from the glass. She jabbed the bolt and set her shoulder against the door frame a second time. Mara kept moving. She slipped the torn photograph from her hoodie pocket and flattened it on the kitchen table with both palms. The photograph's edge had been mentioned in an earlier transmission. She remembered the white seam and how faces had washed grey under her thumb. Her fingers found the small tear she had pressed on, and she felt a pulse of curiosity. What would happen if she let one fragment return? The municipal override had said wait. The photograph did not provide instruction. Outside the curtained window, someone shifted on metal. The silhouette scraped a boot along the fire escape. Mara's throat closed. She whispered the name Jonah, because the name was what surfaced when she tried to name the outline of a child's laugh in her memory. Suspicion turned into doubt. She walked to the radio console, thumbed the big red rotary, and forced the emergency radio into the municipal channel. The overlay banner on the television flickered. Emergency override, remain indoors. The station operator's voice was calm and clipped through the speakers. Station operator, Mara aloud. Her voice cut into the room and clattered against the plaster. She did not expect an answer. She expected protocol and wrote commands. She expected the municipal voice to tell her to lock tighter. She did not expect Elijah K. to break the channel. The speaker popped, then a new voice, clipped and nervous, seeped under the municipal feed. Mara, can you hear me? Elijah's audio came rough, like a cassette wrapped in cloth. The voice was a field patch, not an official stream. Who is this? Mara. She pressed her nails into the table edge. Identify yourself. The silhouette below stopped moving. Elijah K. Signal Tech. I'm not with the broadcast line. Listen, I have something. I can give you a cassette. It contains a single clip. It might restore the lost record. It might not. You will have to decide. Elijah's words were short, clipped, an engineer speaking around risk. She answered without thinking. Station operator says remain until memory ceases. Why would I risk? Mara cut herself off when the silhouette at the walk-out window scraped its hand on the pane. Mara, you obeyed the order last time. You locked the bolt when the override tore through the sitcom at 21:43. Elijah's voice carried the earlier event into the present. I know you remember the photograph going grey. You remember that. I'm offering you a single fragment back. It will be on tape. It will be one scene. You refuse. You keep obeying. You accept. You might remember why they told you to wait. You accept, and you may be marked. Your call. Elijah's tone hardened, the reverb of headphones in a small room. Mara's hands trembled. She pressed her fingers to the brass key on its cord. Her mouth was dry. Suspicion shifted into calculation. She measured the risk by the weight of that key and the remembered friction of the torn photograph in her palm. Her body leaned toward the window. Her eyes tracked the silhouette's outline, as if that figure might hand her an instruction. The overlay banner pulsed again. The station operator's voice returned, but this time the line stuttered within sentences. This is an official municipal override. Do not leave your residence until the memory. The feed snapped and replayed a procedural fragment, then inserted an unrelated directive about reporting broken street lamps. The broadcast clipped. The station operator's cadence tightened. Mara heard it break. She raised her voice and spoke into the receiver. Station operator, crew unidentified on the fire escape. Who is authorized to approach windows? Her question sounded defiant in the small kitchen. The municipal voice answered with a formulaic cautionary fragment. Penalties may be assessed for unnecessary exposure, and then the feed dissolved into a high, thin whine. The household radio hiccuped and returned an older recording, a kitchen scene, a child's laugh, then a man's soft footsteps. Mara's breath hitched. The overlay banner blinked, unauthorized patch detected. The patch was Elijah. The patch had a plan, the first external event after the patch arrived. A metallic knock on the fire escape. Mara counted 3 raps. She went to the window and drew the curtain just enough to see a face. Not a child's face, but Elijah's jawline in a shadow, his palms full of an oily cassette case. He peered up at her through the rain beads on the glass. Their eyes met. He mouthed, Mara. She swallowed. Her heartbeat moved into her mouth. Elijah's discarded voice came back through the speaker. I can get it to you without breaching the directive. Slide the window open a hair. 1 delivery. No more than that. His tone was urgent and precise. Mara, tape it closed immediately after. Seal it. Don't step outside. Mara's suspicion retooled into wary trust. She opened the window a fraction. Cold air licked her wrist. She fumbled with the brass knob and cracked the pane an inch. Elijah leaned in, the cassette cupped in his hand like contraband. Mara, this is a clean recording. Play it on a loop and stop the municipal background. If you need me, shout my name. If you call the operator, you get the override's penalties, understand? His voice was flat now. Sweat pitched at his forehead. Elijah, Mara answered, why are you risking this? Her question held accusation. Elijah kept one gloved finger on the cassette, and the other on the fire escape rail, because the anomaly didn't start with you, Mara. It started with a recording. I need to know who was on those tapes. I keep finding institutional markers in domestic footage. You deserve to know if they are inside your life. He straightened and pressed the cassette through the cracked glass. Take it. Hurry. Tape your window shut afterwards. He stepped back, and the silhouette of his shoulders folded into the dark. Mara closed the pane the rest of the way and taped the crack with a strip torn from a grocery bag. The tape stuck crooked on the glass. Her method was clumsy, but she followed instructions to the letter. She set the cassette on the table, thumbs shaking against the plastic. She felt the second emotion shift then. Curiosity moved into dread as the idea of the station operator's steady voice inside her private life took form. She fed the cassette into Elijah's battered portable player on the kitchen table. The player had been described in Elijah's appearance locket. A portable cassette recorder with scuffed edges and duct tape keeping its battery door closed. Mara clicked the playback and a domestic clip filled the room. A morning kitchen, sunlight patching a linoleum floor, a child's small sock sliding on spilled juice, the distant clatter of a teacup. Then the camera swung and caught a suited figure in the doorway. The figure's blazer matched the institutional palette. The pinned lapel badge flashed a muted red. Mara's fingers clenched. The playback was recorded from inside her own apartment, the same kitchen where she now sat. The man at the doorway smiled at the child and placed his hand on the refrigerator handle with the same measured pause she had seen in public addresses. He did not speak. He set a small sealed envelope on the counter and touched the photograph on top of a stack of mail. He left the room without closing the door properly. The man in the clip turned, and the camera caught his face for a heartbeat. Mara saw the thin scar over the right eyebrow and the small mole near the jawline. Mara's breath went shallow. The station operator stood in her kitchen, recorded inside her memory. The recording showed him marking something on the back of the photograph with a red stamp. Mara, station operator, as if speaking to the tape would change the image. Her whisper had weight. She pressed the player stop, then played it again. The recorded laugh of the child cut to silence. The recorded man had not spoken in the clip, but the rustle of paperwork was audible. Elijah's voice hummed through the speaker with an edge of clipped panic. Play it again, play it again. Pause on the hand, pause on the stamp. Do you see the mark? His words came faster. Do you see the symbol? Mara started the player and then froze the sound with her hand. The recorded man's index finger pressed a small circular stamp into the photograph. The stamp left a thin red sigil. The sigil looked like a broken clock face, off-center and smeared by imperfect ink. The camera zoomed on the mark. The child in the clip wiped a sticky hand across the table and on the refrigerator door. The child's name, Jonna, was spoken in the clip, a soft command from an adult off-camera. Mara felt an anger flare, sharp and physical. Suspicion returned as accusation. Elijah, she said, what is that stamp? Her voice had hard edges now, institutional tagging. Elijah answered, they mark items they want removed from resident memory. They file the originals and send back an edited life. They do this to preserve the population's exposure vectors. He swallowed audibly. Mara, they used your photograph. They used your kitchen. You were present in a private scene, and they altered the recording to hide something. That stamp is a removal mark. The municipal override is a holding order to keep the erasure in place. He stopped and breathed hard into the microphone. The station operator's overlay returned, but fragments only. Citizens are to remain until the memory register falls below threshold. The feed skipped and split into another clip, this one showing a door closing in a corridor, a child's shoe left by the step, then an official patent stamped on a record. The municipal voice added a procedural line about assessments and containment before the feed dissolved. Mara's hands trembled again. Her legs fought with her instinct to go outside. Doubt shifted into anger. She grabbed her hoodie, shoved her hands into the pockets, and found the torn photograph. The photograph showed 3 people in a park, a man, a woman, a small boy on shoulders. One of the faces had already washed toward grey in Chapter 2. She pressed her thumb along the torn edge and suddenly remembered a single concrete fragment. The morning mother closed the gate behind her and didn't return. The memory arrived not as a blur but as a specific sound, the scrape of metal on wood and the clang of an iron latch. The tape kept playing on loop. The recorded clip now revealed the station operator's hand sliding an envelope across the counter and mouthing one phrase at someone off camera. Seal until forget. That exact phrasing was not the municipal text, it was a private instruction. Mara's breath turned cold. She felt betrayed but also relieved. Betrayal clarified motive. The second emotional shift, doubt to clarity, landed as a physical tremor in her ribs. She looked at the radio overlay and made a choice. She dialed through the municipal static and keyed the patch Elijah had used. The overlay indicated unauthorized traffic. The station operator's tone returned, more fractured. This is an official municipal message. All residents must remain inside, the voice faltered. Mara cut it off by speaking directly to the receiver. Station operator, Mara, steadying herself. Who are you in my kitchen? Her words were short and precise, intended to make the voice accountable. There was a long pause and then a thin, procedural fragment. That is not for public dissemination. The station operator's voice regained composure. Mara Ellis, remain inside until the memory ceases to register. This is for your protection and the protection of the community. His voice carried the same antiseptic scent she had always associated with him. The institutional ozone of his delivery. Protection from what? Mara demanded. Protection from what did you mark on my photograph? She had shifted now from asking to demanding. The municipal voice answered with an instruction rather than a reason. Report any unauthorized exposure to your local liaison. Failure to comply will result in, and then static swallowed the sentence. The municipal line would not give her the cause. Only the cassette offered a trace. Only the cassette had given her the station operator's gesture. Elijah's voice broke in again with a rush of technical terms and a raw edge. Mara, there's an archive of marked items. I can access it, but I need someone on site to confirm identity. You have to play the tape to completion. If you stop it, we lose sync. If you play it, you risk whatever reaction the erasure suppresses. His language was precise, like a technician listing variables. Mara stood and carried the player and cassette to the curtained window. The silhouette below had returned and was pressing a palm flat against the glass. This time Mara recognized the small serrated scar on the right eyebrow when the station operator's face slid into the corner of the playback image. She felt the third emotional shift, clarity hardening into dread. Her mouth went dry. Her hand squeezed the cassette suddenly, as if she could crush the memory back inside. Elijah, tell me exactly what happens if I open the window. Mara. Her voice was low but clear. You will receive the full sensory recall. Elijah answered. You will see and hear what the removal intended to hide. You will be the locus and the record. If there's a sigil, if there's a trigger, opening the window could mark you. It could let it back in. It could also give you truth. I won't lie. There's risk, but you asked me why I risked it. I risked it because I found institutional marks in household footage all along this block, Mara. I found the same stamp on photographs in an evidence locker tied to the station operator's dossier. I want to know why my city is stamping lives. His last words came out quick, raw. They argued then, short and fast. Elijah, Mara snapped. You could be recoded for this. You could be gone. Mara, I've already been flagged. They chewed through my clearance. I'm patching you because someone has to be on the other side of the window. Station operator could be monitoring you. Then let him monitor. At least we'll know. You promise you will pull me out if I start to lose it. I promise to stop the recording and attempt to stabilize the feed. Promise me you will not step onto the fire escape. I promise. The exchange contained quick breaths and clipped assurances. 3 lines each, urgent. The cassette player clicked and the domestic clip resumed. The recorded figure in the doorway picked up the photograph and held it level with the camera. He tapped the stamp again and turned the photograph over. The camera recorded the back. A child's name masked in handwriting, a postal label peeled, and a faint blueprint of a clock face drawn in ink. The recorded man's mouth moved. Mara leaned forward and listened. He one sentence, not the municipal directive, but a private instruction. Wait until forgetting completes. He smiled as he said it, the smile small and patient. Mara felt something gather behind her eyes. A pressure that moved toward memory like a hand smoothing glass. It was not cinematic fog or a metaphor. It was a specific tonic of recall that started in her jaw and moved down to the bones in her fingers. Her throat filled with the taste of metal and lemon. She remembered the morning her neighbor had banged on the door and the sound of the latch. The recall arrived as a list of tactile details. The weight of an envelope in her palm, the exact grain of the kitchen table, the sound of a child's sneaker squeak on wet tile. She began to see the moment the station operator had stood in her doorway and marked the photograph. The memory painted a factual, ordered chain of events. The silhouette at the window pressed a forehead to the glass. Mara's hand went to the brass key on its cord, and she felt the torn edge of the photograph in her other pocket. Her pulse ratcheted. Elijah's voice came low and steady through the speaker. If you open it, remember to pull the tape away with your thumb from the inside. Don't let the wind carry the sigil outward. Breathe into your ribs and call my name if it escalates. The technical ritual was an attempt at control. She made the decision. It was not a theatrical opening. It was a small mechanical action. Mara peeled one corner of the grocery tape free and pulled it down. The crack widened by an inch. Cold air hit her face. She set the cassette into her palm so that if the recall surged, she would have something physical to hold. She drew a single breath and cracked the window further. The recall arrived like a lined list. She saw a child on the floor with sticky hands and Jonna's laugh as a distinct syllable. She saw the station operator reach out and touch the photograph as if centering it on the counter. She saw herself, younger, make a choice. To nod, to hand over the photograph, to leave the kitchen holding an envelope. She remembered the exact words she had said in that earlier scene. We will wait. The memory did not demand pity. It supplied facts. Mara felt bile rise and taste it. She saw the door close in her recollection and the latch click. The figure at the glass now banged a fist that matched a recorded hand from the tape. That hand had the small scar and the mole. The climax sharpened. The silhouette outside the window pressed a face to the pane, and Mara saw identity in that outline. It was a boy from the recording. The child from the clip Jonna had grown, or perhaps the silhouette was someone who carried his shape. Mara understood the specific sequence. Years ago, a household exchange had been observed by an institutional liaison. A decision had been made to remove a small event from public record by sealing private items and delaying recall. The municipal program had prioritized suppression over explanation. The station operator had been the human hand executing that program. He had been inside her kitchen, and he had stamped her photograph like a file. Mara opened the window the rest of the way. The memory flooded, not poetic but precise. She remembered the child's small fingers not reaching the table in time, the scrape of a falling toy, the sudden angle of a shoulder, the snap of a bone. The smell of burned toast after a pan had tipped. She remembered hands lifting the child and the sound of a man's voice only half said, "Seal until forget." The memory supplied evidence of a cover action. The station operator had told them to wait inside to avoid witnesses, and then left with evidence in an envelope. Mara's stomach clenched. Her breath came in short packets. The silhouette outside pounded at the glass. She looked down and saw that the red sigil had shifted on the condensation of the pane as if ink had bled up from the tape. The broken clock face appeared, thin and exact. It matched the stamp from the cassette. She felt a new physical reaction. Nausea and a sudden violent clarity mixed with the metallic taste on her tongue. Her legs weakened. Elijah shouted through the speaker, "Mara, stop the tape! Stop it now!" His voice broke into rapid orders. "Shut the window. Tape the seal. Pull back. Pull back!" His timbre had become reverb-tinged panic. The two argued in the doorway of sound, Mara's choice against Elijah's procedure, with 3 rapid exchanges. "Elijah, it matters. Mara, I need to know. Mara, you must stop. I will not be told to forget what I saw. Mara, Elijah, help me if it goes wrong." The lines clipped and each short sentence held the weight of decision. She did not move fast enough. The municipal feed collapsed into unreadable code as soon as her memory completed. The station operator's voice devolved into static, leaving a final procedural fragment that repeated, "Document retention to be affected," and then silence. Elijah's hands fumbled at his multimeter, and the cassette player spat a slow tape hiss. He tried to stabilize the patch. He breathed heavy into the microphone and said, "I'm losing the feed." "Hold her." The technician's actions became frantic. His fingers worked with dials and tape reels, snapping a stabilizer clamp back into place. Mara collapsed into a kitchen chair as the room around her seemed recalibrated by the return of fact. She touched the photograph and the envelope beneath it. The photograph had all three faces again in high contrast. The small boy's smile was intact. She felt an immediate consequence. A vertigo of recollection that left her limbs weak and her mouth tasting like pennies. She swallowed and then put her head in her hands. The municipal overlay burned its last line before the signal died. Unauthorized memory register, corruption threshold exceeded. Elijah cursed softly through the speaker and then went quiet. Mara heard metal tools clink. The station operator's voice came back once, thin and procedural, and then bled into static, the single procedural fragment that remained repeated. A file with liaison, over and over until the household radio looped a slow, low hum. Mara exhaled and chose an action. She taped the torn photograph back together, with a strip of scotch this time, folding edges neatly and pressing hard with both thumbs. She did not say the word forget. She did not speak any ideological line. She taped, sealed, and set the photograph face up on the table so the men's recorded faces looked at her across the linoleum. Her choice was simple and concrete. Keep the picture visible and guard the memory. Outside on the fire escape rail, a thin red sigil gleamed near the spot where condensation had been. Mara peered at it and felt a slow, stubborn resolve form. She did not make a speech. She cleaned the glass with a towel and left the mark only faintly smeared. Then she called Elijah's name into the receiver. "Elijah," she said, "stay on, monitor the line. If they attempt another override, tell me the moment you detect institutional traffic. I will guard the photograph. I will not hand it to them again." Her voice was steady and small. "Mara, I'll keep a watch." Elijah answered. "Station operator will attempt to reassert control. I need you ready to hand the envelope to me if they try to take it. We can archive it outside municipal systems. We'll check other marked items. I'll try to pull your block's logs." His voice softened. He was tired but determined. The station operator's remaining signal stuttered and then dropped into white noise. The municipal overlay died with a finalitude that felt administrative more than dramatic. The feed ended on procedure, not rhetoric. The house felt like a sealed envelope itself, marked and returned to sender. Mara taped the photograph a second time, edging the adhesive so the tear was less visible. She wrapped the faded brass keys cord twice around the photograph and slipped the keyed cord under the envelope and left them together on the table. She did not set them into a drawer. She sat at the window with the curtain pulled back and kept watch while Elijah worked on piecing his logs together. Dawn bled thin through the blinds. The immediate danger had not disappeared. The municipal feed could return. The station operator might appear again in recorded footage, or in person. The child from the clip might return as a silhouette at the glass. But the chapter's mini-conflict had resolved. Mara had chosen to accept the memory, to evidence what had been sequestered, and to share the load with Elijah rather than obey an instruction that demanded silence. The last external event occurred when Mara found, on the condensation of the inner pane, a small red sigil etched into the glass as if by a fingertip. She pressed her thumb to it, and the print smeared to a faint circle. She did not panic. She taped a small corner of the photograph to the window frame near the sigil and left it in place. The action was deliberate and small. She would guard the memory and watch for whatever followed. The municipal feed never fully returned that morning. Elijah sent a short text through the patched channel with coordinates of an archive he had found in a truncated log. Mara read it aloud while she held the photograph to the light. "Archive contains 3 marked items from Block C. They match stamp pattern. Meet outside after curfew if possible." She folded the note and set it under the photograph. She did not break into heroics. She did not decide to march into the street. She stayed inside as the directive ordered, but not in obedience. She remained indoors to watch, to record, and to protect what she now possessed. The concrete image of a man who had stood inside her kitchen and marked an object for institutional removal. The final paragraph of the chapter closed on an action, not a reflection. Mara taped a strip of paper over the torn edge where the stamp had been and in black ink wrote the child's name clearly. Jonna. She pressed the paper down, and when Elijah's patched voice called her name again on the line, she whispered, "Keep watch," and then folded the photograph and set it where she could see it from the window. The municipal feed fractured into one repeating procedural fragment and then fell into long, looping static. The household radio hummed a low drone. Outside, a silhouette lingered on the fire escape and did not move away. Mara watched the figure until her eyes ached and then covered the photograph with a thin towel, leaving only the taped edge visible. She did not say she would not forget. She had already decided to remember.